What do these four celebrities have in common? Mel Brooks, Leonard Bernstein, Norman Mailer, and Betty Friedan. They're all of the same generation, all brilliant, all unapologetically bold and larger than life, and they were all major forces in the shaping of 20th century culture. Also, they're all Jewish. In his new book, Eminent Jews, the longtime New Yorker writer David Denby looks at these four mighty figures through the lens of their own shared heritage, analyzing how, in the post-Holocaust world, four Jewish artists/intellectuals redefined and remade the American cultural landscape. Joining me today is the eminent David Denby himself to chat about the enduring legacies of these four artists and how he thought to place them in conversation with one another. I'm your host, Olivia Rutigliano, and this is Culture Schlock.
I'm so excited to chat with you about it. Would you like to talk about your arrival at the specific format, the presentation of these four characters, and the illumination of their legacies, and the way you place them in conversation with one
Well,
another?
well, Olivia, I'm not like any of them at all. That's the first thing. I don't box with my sons like Norman. I'm not aggrieved like Betty Friedan, although I admire her rage and her obsessional power that led her to write The Feminine Mystique, which came out in 1963. She wrote all the time on the dining room table everywhere, and she made notes, Olivia, in the middle of the night on the marital sheets in black ink. I don't
Wow.
recommend that. I don't recommend that in a relationship. But okay, I think that's remarkable. I mean, it's when you're obsessed with something that many other people don't see, you feel like you're the only sane person and everyone else is crazy. With Lenny, he was central to my life emotionally. I'm not a musician, but I'm a music lover, and I don't unfortunately make outrageous and vulgar jokes like Mel Brooks. So let me just my mother is hanging over my head somewhere, and I just want to say he wrote me a note saying, "You got most of it right." Okay, you put
That's
that up
great.
on the wall.
That's
Thanks.
awesome.
Mom wanted to see that one. Oh, she's been dead 50 years. But anyway, I'm not like Mel, although I love talking to him. He's very, very intelligent and never read a book when he was a kid, became a great reader, and he's very concise. I said, "How is it that you always say exactly what you want to say?" I said this to him on the phone in the shortest number of words. He said, "Look, you're in the Catskills. Get out there, kid. You have 3 minutes. 3 minutes to do a whole comedy act?" And yet at the same time, he said, amateur comics rush to the punchline. You've got to learn how to pause, sometimes go off the beat. It's got to be music. It can't be just a stream of words. And he grew up listening to the radio in the 30s, vaudeville comics that got to the radio, particularly Eddie Cantor, who's been
Uh-huh.
forgotten. Yeah, you haven't forgotten, but he said he learned from listening to them on the radio. Don't rush to the finish line. Pace the joke. So I'm not like any of them, but I have conversations with them in my head. Why did you do this rather than that? Why don't you conduct this symphony rather than that symphony? Why don't you keep your mouth shut on this occasion, but come, that kind of conversation you have with anyone you're obsessed with.
Hmm.
So I had written about Bernstein in the New Yorker two, three times and Mailer two, three times prior to seeing this as a book. And the idea was to confine it to a certain period. All right, they were born after the First World War and they matured after the Second World War, and they triumphed by means of their own gifts and also because there were new media which greatly expanded television, the long playing record,
Hmm.
mass market paperbacks. All these things came in the late 40s and early 50s. And I thought, how would Jews behave if they had the kind of freedom, for good or for ill,
Yeah.
how would they behave if they had the kind of freedom they had never experienced anywhere before? That was the unifying idea. It was about liberty and the dangers of liberty and the glories of liberty. That was it. That was the unifying idea, and I wrote them each as a straight ahead narrative. I didn't try to
Right, right, right.
intertwine them. I thought it would be all about the ligatures if you
Hmm.
did that. You know,
Right.
this happened at 20 when he was 25. Oh, and Betty was didn't know who she was at 20. You know, it would have been
Hmm.
boring.
Right, right,
So
right.
straight ahead four times.
No, it's great. I love the format. I find it very helpful. Well, it's you're immersed in a history and then you're asked to do the comparative work yourself as the reader. And I think that's an elevating attitude to have toward a reader. It doesn't.
That's a great way of putting it. I mean, and one hopes that they sort of inadvertently cast light on each other,
Right, right,
because they were going through some of the same things at the same time.
right.
And they did, clink glasses at parties and occasionally. And Norman and Betty had some abrasive encounters when he was the head of Penn. But basically, they didn't know each other. So it's more a kind of temperamental affinity that they
Hmm.
share. Extreme talent, extreme egotism, and at the same time, miraculously, extreme generosity. They were all teachers, even Mel Brooks, and I make a complicated case for what he was trying to say to the Jews. I take him more seriously than other people do, but I hope I don't slight the fun either. But there, I mean, Lenny was always teaching. He was teaching in the way he conducted it. It was a kind of parallel narrative to with the movie, with the music itself. He was teaching on television. Oh, there were all those films, live TV shows for young people. He was teaching in bed with young men, none of whom, parenthetically, have come forward to complain. First of all, they were men, not boys. And second, I think I've talked to his daughter about this. He gave them something. It was sex, but it wasn't just, he was teaching them, giving them something of music, something of soul. He loved poetry. I don't know what.
Hmm.
So no
Very
one has
Greek.
come. Hmm?
It's very
Greek,
Greek. Yeah.
very Greek. Yeah, yeah. He did write a piece called The Symposium, which based on a Plato dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so I mean, that was it. I mean, they were in my head, and I started writing magazine articles about them, and eventually, sometime around the Korean War or somewhere, I started actually writing it as a book.
That long. Huh.
It took a long time. Yes, it took a long time because I didn't quite, it's hard to write at that length.
Hmm.
Each portrait is there's a prologue and an epilogue, but each portrait's about 80 pages.
Yeah.
And I didn't want it to be any longer than that. It would have been very hard to sell it.
Yes. It would have
And
been a four-volume set.
yes, I mean there are enormous biographies of Bernstein and Mailer and of all of them. I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to have go-ahead momentum, but not get without losing some profundity, without losing thoughtfulness, and what
Yeah.
is kind of Jewish characters
Hmm.
were they, and how did that merge with being American characters? So the length was hard to handle. This is a product of compression. I kept writing it and rewriting it to make it a manageable length.
Hmm. You had a little bit of that Mel Brooks inspiration. I've got 3 minutes to go on. We're gonna put a whole comedy act in there.
Can I tell you a story of one of Mel's?
Please.
Mel is walking across 57th Street in New York near Carnegie Hall. He's about 52. Sorry, in 1952, 53, he's working for Sid Caesar, the great Your Show of Shows, right, which sort of created satire on television, live television, in the early 50s. And on his left is Larry Gelbart, who's also a sketch writer who later created MASH for television and wrote most of Tootsie. And on his right was Neil Simon, who
Hmm.
became Neil Simon. And there are three unknown sketch writers, and three nuns are walking towards them across 57th Street. And Gelbart says, "No, Mel, no." What? What are you talking? Neil Simon says, "Will you get hold of yourself?" He said, "What are you talking? What is the matter?" The nuns come up close. He leaps out at them and says, Take off those costumes. The nun sketch is out. I said, how did they react? He said, they hit the ground. Okay, another very quick anecdote. Leonard Bernstein is conducting the Vienna Philharmonic, the great Vienna Philharmonic in 1972 in Vienna, and they're rehearsing Mahler's Fifth Symphony. Okay, now there's a little backstory here that's very, very important. Mahler had been conductor of the Philharmonic and the State Opera in Vienna from 1897 to 1907. He had played his own symphonies with them, some of them, and he was banned during the Nazi period, after the Anschluss from 1938 to 1945. They didn't know his great late symphonies, and they were resisting, and he couldn't believe it. And something rare for him, he lost his temper, and he said, "I know you can play the notes, but this is not Mahler." He was shocked because he had to teach them their own music, and it had a lot to do with the fact that Mahler was Jewish, that he was Jewish. Here was this guy, I mean, by then he was in his 40s, but here was this guy from suburban Boston who was going to teach the Vienna Philharmonic how to play their own music. And what he was saying to them, in effect, was by wiping out Mahler, you wiped out a part of yourself.
Hmm.
That part of yourself that could deal with irony and complexity and self-criticism, all of which is in those late symphonies. So they loved him. And they loved him because I think in part because he was an American Jew and part of a conquering power in World War II. And he liberated them from their hang-ups and their loathings.
Hmm.
And that changed his whole reputation in New York. I mean, it's a kind of strange rhythm between the center of classical tradition and New York. So my point about this is not that Jews attain virtue by talking smack to Gentiles. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean is they didn't, and I can tell other anecdotes, they didn't expect to be punished.
Yeah.
They did not expect to be punished. And everywhere, earlier Jews had to be cautious. They lived on sufferance, in Spain, say,
Hmm.
in the 15th century, or in France after Napoleon emancipated the Jews. I mean, they had good periods, very good periods, which all ended disastrously. We don't even have to talk about Central Europe, Germany and Austria and the rest. And here, George Washington wrote the congregation in Newport a very moving letter, and I think it's 1794. It said, in effect, he said, "You belong here.
Hmm.
Every man sits under his own fig tree and is comfortable." Well, there are no fig trees on West End Avenue, I have to tell you. This is a shock, I'm sure.
Same here on York.
Or on York Avenue. No fig trees on York Avenue, but you know what I mean. And of course, we all want that comfort to continue, and this is a very difficult period, and we've all gotten very wary. But they felt they were not going to be punished, and that they could enact what they felt and sort of express their bodies. They liberated the Jewish body. I mean, Mailer's parents' generation, all of the parental generation tended to be, how shall I put it, sexually reticent.
Hmm.
They didn't drink very much. My parents, who were very gentle, had great contempt for what they called shickers
Hmm.
because they were not family men. They
Uh-huh.
didn't take care of families. Mailer drank a great deal when he was young.
Yeah.
Um, they loved Miami. He hated Miami. I mean, you could not go through a whole list of ways that he was breaking with what he took to be a soft,
Hmm.
middle-class Jewish background. He felt he had to rediscover soulfulness. If
Yes.
if if he had an impulse from within, it had to be authentic.
Hmm.
And it meant this is where it gets touchy, that he had to act on it, that he had
Yeah.
to act out, with danger to himself and sometimes to other people.
Yes.
He sort of reversed Freud. Instead of sitting on a couch, and trying to dredge up what experience when you were 3 or 4 caused this neurotic pattern as a grown-up, act it out,
Right.
act it out, act it out. Sit down in a chair and write for 8 hours. That's one way of acting out. Box with people, take all kinds of physical risks, challenge people. I mean, when I knew him, he couldn't have been gentler or nicer. He was 75. and he wanted a good piece in the New Yorker out of me, and he got one. But he could be confrontational and at times, and at other times he was very intent on the person in front of him and would sort of pull them out
Hmm.
because he prided himself as a novelist on trying to understand people, figure out what made them tick.
Hmm.
His correspondence is extraordinary. Strangers would write him, and he would write these long, right, sympathetic letters. I mean, and then that was turned out disastrously in one case with Jack Henry Abbott, who was a convict who came out in part because of Norman's efforts, and who killed someone, and immediately, if not immediately, but soon after. And Norman kept on writing him, even when he went back into prison. He wouldn't let go.
Hmm.
And oddity of all oddities, he wanted to cure him of Marxism, Leninism, and so he gave him Jewish sacred texts, the Talmud, this enormous 26
Yeah.
volumes of laws, and it's almost funny. I mean, it is so strange. But this was the teacherly element that never let up in any of them.
Right. Well, actually, I'd like to speak to this teacherly element and bring it back to a point you made earlier, which I thought, which was the thing that I noticed when I was preparing for today's interview and I was reading through the book. There was something so interesting about each of their legacies because they were able to make their ideas and the culture that they were assimilating and um, transforming into new ideas, developing, they were able to make that so wildly accessible. And my background, I have a PhD in Victorian literature, but my specific interest is the moment in the late 19th century that culture becomes mass culture, and that the people from the highest echelons and the lowest echelons are able to go to this experience the same theater, the same kinetoscope, things, the
Yeah,
same exhibitions, the same read the same pamphlets and buy the same things, and culture is suddenly vertical in society. And I think that happens again
right.
in the mid 20th century through television and mass market paperbacks, as you said, and all of these different means of cultural, literary and philosophical dissemination. And so I thought one of the most fascinating elements was how you emphasize that these figures who are, doing work that is highbrow and that is complex and heady and requires tremendous study, you emphasize the lack of pretension through their excitement in imparting and inviting others to have conversations with them about this subject matter. So that the
Right.
sort of the teacherly and the scholarly, and then the sort of pop culture aspects are all braided together. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was how all of these figures created a sort of highbrow pop culture, and then how the sort of unifying thesis of the book, the sort of Jewishness that all four of these figures grappled with or took up in different ways, how that all braided together to create a new phenomenon.
Well, they hated jargon of any kind. I mean, they had very good education, and I'm sure they knew the lingo, but they absolutely refused to use it. I mean, Norman's sentences are very complex sometimes, but he meant them to be read by anyone who liked to read. I
Yeah.
mean, it was an attempt to extend the language and to play with the language, but not to lose people in referential, elusive, jargonish. It was always to communicate something. It may not have been something you wanted to hear, but and Betty did not. She was trained as a psychologist, but what she did to write The Feminine Mystique was to extend the methods of a working journalist. She worked for the women's magazines. Everyone forgets them. They had enormous circulation. Ladies' Home Journal, Red Book, right? I mean,
Mm.
they had 5 and 6 million copies, and all sorts of good writers wrote for them. Mary McCarthy wrote for Vogue. I mean, so that's what she came out of, and she extended the methods of a magazine journalist to
Yeah.
this strange situation. There were women in the suburbs, okay, white, upper middle class women, and they had, quote, everything. They
Mm.
had a husband who earned money. They had children. They had a car, maybe two cars. They had community organizations. They had golf clubs. and they were miserable.
Yep.
Why? Why? So what she did was interview lots and lots of people and then read all the experts. And the book that she wrote, definitely the I mean she didn't have, access to big data or big data as we say. She drew on what they said using journalistic methods, and she told the story that needed to be told, that they were sort of all telling
Yeah.
in their own way. That I mean, and that caused an extraordinary explosion. Um, when it went into paperback, over 1 million people bought the book and passed it around. Finally, 3 million people. That this was before your time, but there were metal circular racks in every drugstore, at the
Mm.
front of every supermarket. And what would be in there? Oh, there would be Shakespeare's tragedies.
Uh-huh.
And
Yes.
there would be, I don't know, Pearl Buck, successful novelists, James Michener, and there would be Betty Friedan.
Yeah.
And the book got passed from one woman to another, and people who had not read it, but just heard about it. There was a culture that made women feel they were second rate.
Mm-hmm.
They just, there was a mystique. Women were supposed to be passive.
Right.
Right? They were supposed to be mothers and husbands. Yes, they were those things, absolutely, positively, but that's all they were supposed to be. So just hearing the thesis of the book, I mean, she wasn't the only feminist around in the early 60s. There were quite a few, but the book had a kind of explosive concentration in part because she was able to use ordinary expository methods of journalism to reach millions of people. And Bernstein's conducting style was a kind of vernacular. I mean, he was very expressive with his arms and his pelvis and his eyebrows and everything. He shocked a lot of people in the early
Classical
60s.
Elvis.
Yeah, and there was until he went to Vienna and they loved him. And the emotional fluency that appealed to the Viennese changed American opinion about him. I mean, at this point, he's over the top. I mean, as in many ways, he wrote West Side Story, which, Japanese 8-year-olds put on every year in Tokyo, wherever, all over Japan. Yeah, and he's one of the great conductors of the 20th century. But that way of, as I said before, it was a kind of parallel narrative to the music itself. And in the end, everyone realized that all of that movement was actually very precise and very literally instrumental,
Yeah.
getting this part of the orchestra, that part of the orchestra to do this, to do that. So and Mel, he used the wildest, roughhouse comedy that going back, I don't know, to the Greeks or even earlier, to all kinds of travesty. And it was always about the body. The body had needs. The body expels, how shall I put it, fluids of all kinds. Um, and it was an assault on death.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I say. Take him a little more seriously than others. His father died when he was 2. His mother was just great, but he had the mother supported him in every way, and he could never reach his father, and that's I think that made him want to reach everybody.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like he's saying, "You tried to kill all of us. We're still alive."
We're still alive.
So he does Springtime for Hitler, right? In the producers, boys and girls in beautiful Nazi regalia. And then even more shocking in the History of the World Part One, which I'm sorry to say, Olivia, I panned in New York Magazine in
Really?
1981. Yes, Mel said, yes, I know. The Inquisition, another musical number.
Yeah.
Mel in the red cassock,
Yeah.
as Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, and monks dancing on all sides of him, and the Jews strung up on the wall, in all sorts of grotesque tortures, and then nuns pulling them into the water. What in the world was he doing? Well, I think he was sort of, I don't want to put words in his mouth, and I'm not sure he would say the same thing now after October 7th, but I think he was saying to the Jews, get over it. You're alive. These horrifying things happened. You have succeeded in this country in a
Mm.
way that's unparalleled.
Mm.
You're alive. You're doing well. You can laugh at this stuff. Now I can revive these Jew killers in order to humiliate them
Right.
with comedy, with
Right.
musical comedy. Finally, he said, okay, you're right. I mean, he didn't, like many popular entertainers, he's very wary about making any profound statement about what he's doing. You know, like John Ford, the great director, showed up at some meeting in the late 40s and he said, I'm John Ford. I make Westerns. That's it.
My badge.
And initially Mel said, yeah, yeah, you may be right, but I'm just an entertainer. Yeah, right. Some entertainer.
Right. Yeah.
Right. The world's universal entertainer. So, I mean, so they, as you were saying, they were artists and intellectuals in a period of greatly enlarged mass communications, and they figured out how to use all that to their advantage to challenge people without cheapening what they had to
Right.
say. That
Exactly.
was the miracle, because we could name other examples who did cheapen what they wanted to say. You know,
Very.
so that's why these four.
Yeah. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Is there anything about the book that you would particularly like to have on this record? Another anecdote or something that you haven't been able to say in other interviews?
Well, Betty's The Feminine Mystique comes out in 1963. It was actually during a newspaper strike. It sells 60,000 copies, which, let me tell you, as a book writer, is not bad. And that's a much smaller population.
Yeah.
Her no good husband kept bugging the publisher, fellow named Brockway, to do more, and Betty also. She wrote it, which I've read in her archive, a 14-page letter to Brockway. You know, if you didn't realize why this was important, why did you publish it? If you did realize it, why it was important, why didn't you push it anyway? You know, so it sells then, as I said before, 1.3 million in on the racks at the front of the drugstore, mass market paperback. So Brockway says, let's go lunch. Let's have lunch. Let's talk about your next book. So she says, what next book?
Yeah.
Which you made me feel so Jewish for pushing my book. Fuck you. Now,
Sure.
well, his wife had 13 children, so I wonder if she was thinking what this man has put his wife through. I don't know. That may have been part of her response,
How
but
petty.
yeah, no, she was a piece of work, as they say, and it got sad later in life because she became a diva and she insisted on, you know, the best table,
Mm,
that kind of thing, the best room in a hotel, and so on. And that was not what the women's movement was about,
right.
central
Right. Right.
leadership. It had, you
Right.
know, spread out to everything, and she
Right.
didn't get that. But
That's
I prize that. I mean, everyone has always longed to tell off a publisher. So,
that's certainly true, and that's certainly true. And the fact that, she wasn't the fact that she was telling something to women that would be indelible, that would, live on much more significantly than if she had chased down a second book just for notoriety or, a larger advance. Like
yeah.
she did the work and she said what she needed to say. It's a bit Harper Lee-esque, right? Like, I I said my piece. I'm not going to, pursue this for
Well,
commercial
she did
appropriate.
have
No,
other
no, no,
publishers
she did, but just in
and
that
wrote
same
a lot more,
person.
and none of it is as good as the
No,
Feminine Mystique.
no, it's not.
Um,
Um,
uh, but I found her archives where she was writing notes to herself, fascinating to watch as a record of someone obsessed. She did something very strange when she was working on the Feminine Mystique. She would turn an 8.5 by 11 page sideways, fold it in half, and write a little bit on the left side and a little bit on the right side, and then turn to another page, and then stack up these pages. She was making a book at her desk, literally a book, and you can't. It's written in such haste. It's very hard to read it. It's like way slanted to
yeah.
the right. It's like head into the wind. I'm a second generation Jewish immigrant. You put your head down into the wind, right? That was what the prose, I mean, just the physical prose style. Mailer's writing is very precise, and his notes on the fight. which was the rumble in the jungle, the fight of the century, right? I couldn't believe it. I mean, I could. They were just on ordinary 3x5 cards. He couldn't have taken those notes during the fight. It was too exciting. I mean, you see pictures of him standing up, and so he must have seen it again on a videotape or something, whatever technology was, and taken notes then. I don't know. His biographer, Mike Lennon, who wrote a wonderful book, wasn't sure
Yeah,
about
I've got
that.
it right there.
Yeah. Oh, it's a very fine book, and he helped me a lot. Um, so now they had their quirks. They had their quirks, and people accuse Lenny of being a narcissist and practicing in front of the mirror. Absolutely not. It was all natural expression, and it frightened people because it was sensual. The
Yes,
ecstasies of classical music are supposed to be clean, for God's
yes.
sake.
No,
Right. It was sensual. There was something. There was no gap for him in an between an idea and his physical expression of it.
yes.
That is incredibly attractive and incredibly threatening to some people.
And it pertains to the other subjects in the book too, right? As you were saying, the intersection between the intellectual and the bodily and the physical. And
Absolutely. All
every
of them.
single one of them was chasing a sort of totality of human existence, a sort of intellectual and
Absolutely.
physical marriage that could, send them into their sort of greatest potential.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. And I think they did, how shall I put it, liberate the Jewish body. I mean, the previous generation was rather cautious. I mean, because they didn't want to be punished. They took the Old Testament says, "Thou shalt not," and Norman's solution was, "Thou shalt." So he hated the image of himself as a nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn. Why did he hate it? Because he was a nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn. He made model airplanes, for God's sakes. But he went off to his aunt's hotel on the Jersey Shore when he was starting, when he was, I don't know, 15.
Mhm.
They gave him a room and some food. He wrote fiction. He was obsessively hardworking fiction writer and journalism writer. And let me say, for all his philandering, he was married 6 times
Yeah.
and cheated on all of them. He was also, in some ways, an ordinary New York upper middle class parent. He insisted that they study, that they don't do any dope until they graduate, that he had them in the summer. He was an intermittent. The women did the heavy lifting, the wives, particularly Norris Church, the last one, who didn't mind a lot of people showing up and leaving the show. She didn't mind. Um, but he had these kind of summer camp. He'd put his little girls into shaky boats and put them out into the bay in Maine somewhere when they weren't in. But he also they had summer camp games. Did they do scavenger hunts? No, they made films of Tennessee Williams, uh, and Eugene O'Neill. I mean, this is a little bit more challenging than. And if you look at the children now, and they're in this movie by Jeff Zimbalist,
Yeah.
Come Alive with Norman Mailer. I'm getting the title right?
Yep. How
Yes.
to Come Alive. Yep.
How to Come Alive, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Um, they're all extremely soulful,
Yeah.
all of them.
Yeah.
And I think they got that from him, as well as their mothers.
Culture Schlock can be found on Lit Hub Radio and is produced by Olivia Media. The perky theme song you're listening to right now was written and performed by Richard Rutigliano. This episode was produced by Olivia Rutigliano and John Buffalo Mailer with help from Drew Broussard from Lit Hub Radio. And of course, this episode would not be possible without the participation of David Denby, whose rave-reviewed newest book, Eminent Jews, is out now. Again, I'm your host, Olivia Rutigliano. Thanks for listening. See you again next week.